Welcome back to the Sleeplorians, your cozy storytelling channel, dedicated to the untold origin lore of legendary fantasy characters from your favorite films and books. Make sure you like and subscribe to receive more relaxing, lore-filled stories to accompany your peaceful slumber. Tonight, we're going to tell a different kind of story. Not a tale of heroes or wizards, but the story of someone who is consumed by darkness. The complete history of Gollum, from his innocent beginnings as a simple riverfolk, through his long corruption, to his final moments that would determine the fate of the world. This is a tragedy in the truest sense, a story about how something precious can destroy everything it touches, how obsession can hollow out a soul until almost nothing remains. But it's also a story about pity, about mercy, about the small spark that can survive even centuries of darkness. So settle in, close your eyes, and let this tale carry you gently into sleep. We'll follow the long, sad journey of a creature who was once just a person, someone with a name, a family, and a life by the river. Someone who had no idea what was waiting for him in the dark waters. Get comfortable and cozy. Take one long, deep breath. Close your eyes, and let's begin at the very beginning. Before there was a Gollum, before there was corruption, before there was anything but a simple life by the banks of the great river. Act 1. Before the ring, innocence lost. There was a time long ago when Gollum was not Gollum at all. There was a time when he had a different name, a proper name, given to him by people who loved him. When he walked upright in the sun without fear, when he laughed without that horrible gurgling sound in his throat, when he thought about things other than his precious, because there was no precious yet, nothing to obsess over, nothing to consume him. There was a time when he was simply Sméagol. He was born among the Riverfolk, a small community that lived along the banks of the great river Anduin, in the vales between the misty mountains and Mirkwood. This was in the early years of the Third Age, when the world was still recovering from the wars of the Second Age, when Sauron had been defeated but not destroyed, when the peace was new and fragile. The Riverfolk were a quiet people, living simple lives far from the great events of the world. They were not like the hobbits of the Shire, though they were related to them. They were Stors, one of the 3 branches of the Hobbit kind, and they had chosen a different path than their western cousins. Where the Shire hobbits had settled in rolling hills and built their cozy holes in the earth, surrounding themselves with gardens and farms and the ordered comfort of a pastoral life, the Stors had remained by the water. They were river people, comfortable with boats and fishing, at home on the banks of the Anduin in a way that Shire hobbits never would have been. They were taller than other hobbits, broader in build, less afraid of water and open spaces. They wore boots sometimes, which Shire hobbits would have thought barbaric. They lived in small settlements along the river, rather than in the concentrated villages of the Shire. They were, in many ways, a people apart, following traditions that stretch back to the days before the Great Migration west. And into this community, into this quiet riverside life, Sméagol was born. His early years were shaped by the river. The Anduin was not just a feature of the landscape. It was the center of everything. It provided food in abundance, fish of all kinds that could be caught with net or line, or even bare hands if you were quick and patient enough. It provided a highway for the few travelers who passed through, bringing news and goods from distant places. It provided water for drinking and washing, a place to swim on hot summer days, a constant presence that shaped the rhythms of life. Sméagol grew up with the sound of the river always in his ears. The gentle lapping of water against the shore, the splash of fish jumping, the creak of boats being pulled up onto the bank, the calls of water birds. These were the sounds of home, of safety, of a world that was small and knowable and peaceful. He lived with his extended family, as was the custom among his people. But there was one person who mattered more to him than all the others, his grandmother. She was the matriarch of their family, old and wise in the way of people who have lived long by the river and learned its moods. She told stories of the old days, of the time before they had settled here, of the great journey their ancestors had made. She taught Sméagol which fish were good to eat and which to throw back, where the best fishing spots were, how to read the weather by watching the water and the sky. More than that, she loved him, simply, unconditionally, in the way grandmothers do. When others in the family found him tiresome or annoying, when his constant questions or his mischief tried their patience, she simply smiled and made room for him by her side. Sméagol adored her. He would sit with her for hours, listening to her stories, helping her with small tasks, bringing her the best fish he caught, seeking her approval in all things. That bond between them was perhaps the strongest, purest thing in his young life. The one relationship untainted by the complications that would come later. As a young hobbit, for that is what he was, however different from the Shire folk, Sméagol had a personality all his own. He was curious about everything, always poking into places he shouldn't, asking questions, wanting to know how things worked and why things were the way they were. His mind was quick, always moving, always seeking new information. He was talkative, perhaps too much so. He loved to chat, to gossip, to share whatever he had learned or heard. In a small community where everyone knew everyone else's business, Sméagol made it his business to know it first and tell it widest. Not from malice, but from a genuine enjoyment of information, of secrets, of being the one who knew things. Some found this charming, others found it irritating, but it was simply who he was, a social creature who lived as much through words and connections as through action. He was playful too, enjoying games and tricks, laughing easily at jokes or funny stories. There was a lightness to him, a boyish quality that persisted even as he grew older. He found joy in simple things, a particularly good fish caught after a long wait, a beautiful stone found at the river's edge, a successful prank played on a friend. And he loved secrets, not dark secrets or dangerous knowledge, but the everyday mysteries that make life interesting, the hiding places where fish gathered, the spot where a rare flower grew, the story behind why old Mardil walked with a limp. He collected these small secrets the way others collected shells or interesting rocks, treasuring them not for any power they gave him, but simply for the pleasure of knowing. His days followed the rhythms of the river, rising early to check the fishing lines set the night before, helping with the boats, mending nets, preparing the catch, swimming in the shallows on hot afternoons, gathering with others in the evening to eat and talk and tell stories as the sun set over the water. It was a good life, simple but good. The Riverfolk did not have the abundance of the Shire with its 6 meals a day and its carefully tended gardens. Their lives were closer to the edge of wildness, more aware of the dangers that lurked in the forest or came down from the mountains. But they had enough. They had each other. They had the river. And Sméagol had no complaints. He had no grand ambitions, no desire to be more than what he was. He didn't dream of adventure or glory. He didn't want to leave the river and see distant lands. He didn't yearn for power or wealth or recognition beyond his small community. He was content, or if not perfectly content, at least he was no more discontent than any young person who sometimes feels restless, who sometimes wonders if there's more to life, but who expects that those feelings will pass and that he will settle into the pattern of his elders, eventually finding a mate, raising children, growing old by the river, just as his grandmother had done. There was no darkness in him, no shadow waiting to unfold, no corruption lurking beneath the surface. He was simply a person, with flaws certainly, perhaps too curious, too talkative, too interested in things that weren't his business, but not wicked, not evil, not cursed. Just a young hobbit-like creature living his life by the river, fishing and swimming and gossiping and laughing, completely ordinary in every way that mattered. The Anduin flowed on, as it had flowed for ages, carrying water from the mountains to the sea. Birds called from the reeds. Fish jumped and rippled the surface. The sun rose and set, day after day, season after season, year after year. And Sméagol lived his small, peaceful life, untouched by the great events of the world, unknown to history, unremarkable in every way. He had no idea that something was waiting for him in the depths of that river, something that had lain there for centuries, lost and forgotten, slowly working its way downstream through mud and current, something that would find him one day, or that he would find, and that in finding it, everything he was would be consumed. But that day had not come yet. For now, there was just the river and the sun and a young hobbit named Smeagol who loved his grandmother and enjoyed fishing and talked too much and kept small secrets and lived a life that was normal in every way. For now, there was innocence. For now, there was peace. For now, Smeagol was simply himself, complete and whole, before the corruption, before the obsession, before the long darkness that would swallow him and leave behind only a creature that would be called Gollum. The river flowed, the days passed, and for a little while longer, Sméagol's life remained his own, untouched by the shadow that was slowly, inevitably, drifting toward him through the dark waters. Act 2. The day everything changed. The ring appears. It was supposed to be a day like any other day, a day for fishing, for enjoying the river, for the simple pleasures that had filled Sméagol's life for as long as he could remember. It was his birthday. Not a particularly significant birthday, not a coming of age or a milestone. just another year added to his count. But birthdays were celebrated among his people. Modest celebrations with family and friends. Perhaps a special meal. Perhaps small gifts. Sméagol had gone to the river with his friend Sméagol, or perhaps cousin. The exact relationship is lost to time, though they were kin of some kind, tied together by blood and by the small community they shared. Sméagol was dear to him, or as dear as anyone besides his grandmother. They had fished together countless times, swam together in the summer heat, shared secrets and jokes and the easy companionship of people who have known each other all their lives. It was meant to be a pleasant day, a birthday outing, two friends on the river, enjoying the weather, perhaps hoping for a good catch. The sun was bright on the water. The current was gentle. They had taken a small boat out, rowing to one of their favorite spots where the fish were plentiful and the river bottom was interesting, full of stones and hidden places where things collected. And Sméagol, playful as he always was, decided to go swimming. He dove into the water, the coolness a relief from the warmth of the day. He swam down to the river bottom, his hands reaching out to explore, to see what might be found in the mud and stones. His fingers touched something smooth and metallic and completely out of place in the riverbed. He grasped it, pulled it free from where it had lain buried in silt for nearly 2,500 years. He surfaced, gasping for air, his hand closed around his find. A ring, golden, beautiful, perfectly preserved despite the ages it had spent in the water. It caught the sunlight and seemed to glow with an inner radiance that was more than just reflected light. Sméagol stared at it, transfixed. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. So simple in design, just a plain gold band, and yet somehow extraordinary, compelling, impossible to look away from. And Sméagol, sitting in the boat, saw it too. The moment his eyes fell upon the ring, something happened. Something immediate and terrible and irreversible. It was as if a hook had been set in his heart, a connection forged that could never be broken. Every fiber of his being suddenly knew with absolute certainty that the ring was his, not should be his, not could be his, but was his. It belonged to him in a way that nothing had ever belonged to anyone. He needed it. Not wanted, needed. The way you need air or water or your own heartbeat. It was suddenly, impossibly, unbearably essential. "Give it to me," Sméagol said. His voice was strange, tight with an intensity that hadn't been there moments before. Sméagol looked up, confused. He was still treading water, still holding the ring, still marveling at his find. "What? The ring? Give it to me. It's my birthday present." It was an absurd demand. Sméagol had found it. It was his by any reasonable law of finding, by any custom their people followed. You didn't simply claim something someone else had discovered just because it happened to be your birthday. But Sméagol wasn't thinking reasonably. He wasn't thinking at all in the way he normally thought. The ring had touched something in him, had awakened something, or perhaps created something that hadn't existed before. A hunger, a need, a certainty that overrode everything else. Friendship, fairness, common sense, decency. "I found it," Sméagol said, swimming toward the boat. "It's mine. I'll show you. Look how beautiful." Give it to me." The words came out harsh, demanding, utterly unlike Smeagol's normal, cheerful chatter. Sméagol's expression changed from excitement to concern. "Sméagol, what's wrong with you? I found it. It's mine. It's my birthday." Sméagol's voice was rising now, taking on a desperate, wheedling quality. "You should give it to me as a present. We're friends, cousins, family. You should want me to have it." But Sméagol was climbing into the boat now, the ring clutched in his fist, and he was looking at Sméagol with growing unease. This wasn't right. This wasn't how his friend behaved. There was something in Sméagol's eyes that he'd never seen before, something hungry and wild. "No," Sméagol said firmly. "I found it. It's mine." And that word, mine, seemed to break something in Sméagol. The ring was his, not Sméagol's. His. How dare Sméagol claim it? How dare he refuse to hand it over? It was his birthday, and the ring was his, and Sméagol was standing between him and what belonged to him. And that was unacceptable, unbearable, impossible to tolerate. They argued, voices rising, the friendly companionship of the morning turning ugly and hostile. Sméagol refusing to give up his find, Sméagol becoming more and more desperate, more and more aggressive in his demands. And then Sméagol's hands were around Sméagol's throat. It happened so quickly. One moment they were arguing, the next Sméagol was strangling his friend, his cousin, his companion of countless days on the river. His hands squeezed tight, cutting off air, cutting off the protest, cutting off the life. Sméagol's eyes went wide with shock and terror and betrayal. He struggled, tried to fight back, but Sméagol had surprise and desperate strength on his side. He didn't let go, couldn't let go. Not until Sméagol went limp, not until the struggling stopped, not until his friend lay dead at the bottom of the boat. And then, in the sudden horrible silence, Sméagol pried the ring from Sméagol's dead fingers. It slipped onto his own finger so easily, as if it had been made for him, as if it had been waiting all these long centuries just for this moment, for this person. And the ring settled there, and Sméagol felt a rush of satisfaction so intense it was almost painful. His, finally his. The precious was his. For a moment, he simply sat there, staring at the ring on his finger, feeling its weight, its rightness, and then reality began to creep in around the edges of that satisfaction. Sméagol was dead. His friend, his cousin, someone he had known all his life, dead by his hands, murdered for a piece of jewelry that he hadn't even known existed an hour ago. What had he done? But the thought was fleeting, quickly buried under rationalization. It was Sméagol's fault, really. Sméagol shouldn't have refused. It was Sméagol's birthday. The ring was obviously meant for him. He'd known it the moment he saw it. Sméagol had been selfish, keeping something that clearly belonged to someone else. Yes, that was it. Sméagol had brought this on himself, and now Sméagol had to deal with the body. He looked around, checking to make sure no one had seen, no one had heard. The river was empty. They had chosen an isolated spot, far from the usual fishing areas. They were alone. Sméagol pushed Sméagol's body over the side of the boat. It slipped into the water with barely a splash, the current beginning to pull it downstream immediately. Let the river take him. Let him be found somewhere far away, if he was found at all. Perhaps people would think he had drowned accidentally, had gotten into trouble while swimming, had been pulled under by the current. Sméagol rowed back to shore, his mind working quickly now, constructing the story he would tell, the lie that would protect him, that would keep the ring safe, that would prevent anyone from taking his precious away. When he returned home, when people asked about Sméagol, Sméagol would say they had separated, that Sméagol had gone off on his own to check different fishing spots, that Sméagol hadn't seen him in hours, that he was worried something might have happened. And when they asked about the ring, about the beautiful golden band on his finger that he couldn't quite bring himself to hide yet, he would smile and say it was a birthday present. Sméagol had given it to him, his dear friend Sméagol, who had found something wonderful and had generously gifted it for his birthday. The lies came so easily, unnaturally easily, as if the ring itself was feeding them to him, smoothing his words, making the deception flow like water. And people believed him. Why wouldn't they? Sméagol had never been a murderer before. He was curious, gossipy, sometimes annoying, but not dangerous, not violent, not capable of killing someone over a trinket. But he was now. The ring had changed him in an instant, in the space between seeing it and claiming it, had seen something in him, some potential for obsession, for selfishness, for darkness, and had amplified it, fed it, nurtured it into full bloom. The ring had chosen Sméagol, not randomly, not by accident. It had lain in the river waiting, and when Sméagol pulled it from the mud, when Sméagol saw it, the ring had recognized something, a soul that could be corrupted, a heart that could be consumed, a person who would do anything, sacrifice anything, become anything for the sake of possessing it. Other people might have resisted, might have felt guilt that was stronger than desire, might have been horrified enough by what they had done to throw the ring away, to flee from it, to refuse its influence even at the cost of that terrible craving. But Sméagol was not other people. In him, the ring found fertile ground, and in the ring, Sméagol found something he hadn't known he was missing, something precious, something that filled a void he hadn't known existed until it was filled. And so the bargain was struck, in blood and lies and instant corruption. Sméagol would keep the ring would keep Sméagol, and together they would sink into darkness, year by year, decade by decade, century by century, until there was almost nothing left of the person who had been. But that was still to come. On this day, this terrible birthday, Sméagol simply slipped the ring into his pocket. It felt wrong to take it off his finger, but he couldn't let everyone see it. Not yet. And went home to his grandmother's house. She embraced him, wished him happy birthday, asked where Sméagol was, and Sméagol lied to her face, smooth and easy, and felt nothing but the weight of the ring in his pocket. The day everything changed, the day innocence died, the day Sméagol took the first step on a path that would lead to the darkness beneath the mountains, to 500 years of isolation and madness, to becoming something that was barely recognizable as the person who had been. But he had the ring, his precious, his birthday present, his own. And in that moment, touching it through the fabric of his pocket, feeling its reassuring presence, Sméagol thought it was worth it. He had no idea what he had truly lost, what he had traded away for a circle of gold, what the ring would take from him in exchange for the brief, terrible joy of possession. The river flowed on, carrying Sméagol's body downstream. The sun set on Sméagol's birthday, and in the darkness of his pocket, the ring waited, patient and eternal, ready to consume everything he was and everything he might have been. Act 3. Banished from the light. Exile. The changes came gradually at first, so gradually that Sméagol himself didn't notice them, but others did. It began with small things. Sméagol had always been curious, interested in other people's business, but now there was something different about it, something darker. He didn't just want to know secrets anymore. He wanted to use them, to manipulate, to gain advantage. He would listen at doorways, lurking in shadows where he had once simply walked up and asked questions. He would follow people, watching them when they thought they were alone, learning things that were meant to be private. And then he would use what he learned, dropping hints, spreading rumors, turning people against each other with a carefully placed word or a meaningful look. It gave him a sense of power, a small, petty power perhaps, but power nonetheless. And the ring fed on it, encouraged it, whispered that he was clever, that he deserved to know these things, that others were keeping secrets from him, and he had every right to uncover them. His friends began to avoid him. The easy companionship he had once enjoyed evaporated. People would stop talking when he approached, would make excuses to leave, would look at him with suspicion and discomfort. But Sméagol told himself he didn't care. He had his precious. What did he need with their friendship? The ring was better than any of them, more loyal, more valuable, more important than every relationship he had ever had. Then the thefts began. At first, there were small things. Food that went missing, a tool borrowed and never returned, a coin that disappeared from where it had been left. Nothing significant, nothing that could be proven. But in a small community where everyone knew everyone, where trust was assumed and theft was almost unheard of, even small thefts were noticed. And people began to whisper. Sméagol's name came up more and more often. Had anyone noticed how he always seemed to have things he shouldn't have? How he knew where things were kept, who had what, when people would be away from their homes? The whispers grew louder when the cruelty started. Sméagol had always loved small animals, had been gentle with them, enjoyed watching birds and playing with the dogs that roamed the village. But now there were incidents. A cat found hurt, crying in pain. A dog that cowered when Sméagol approached. Dead fish left in places where they would rot and stink, where they served no purpose except to upset and disturb. Children began to say they were afraid of him. He looked at them strangely, they said. He smiled when he shouldn't smile. He said things that made them uncomfortable, that they didn't fully understand, but that felt wrong somehow. And through it all, Sméagol wore the ring. Not openly, he was too clever for that, too possessive to let others see it. But he wore it, felt its weight on his finger, drew strength and comfort from its presence. When things went wrong, when people turned against him, when he felt isolated and rejected, he would touch the ring and feel better, feel justified, feel that he was in the right and they were wrong to treat him this way. The ring told him he was special, that he was chosen, that they were all beneath him, too stupid to understand, too ordinary to appreciate what he possessed. But even the ring couldn't completely shield him from the consequences of his actions. The breaking point came, as it had to come eventually. The exact details are lost to time. Perhaps a theft too obvious to deny. Perhaps an act of cruelty too public to ignore. Perhaps simply the accumulation of too many incidents, too many suspicions, too many fears. The community gathered. They confronted him. And when they did, there was one face in the crowd that hurt more than all the others combined. His grandmother, she who had loved him unconditionally, who had defended him when others complained, who had believed the best of him even when the evidence suggested otherwise. She stood there with tears in her eyes, and she looked at him not with love, but with something that might have been fear or grief or both. "You've changed, Sméagol," she said quietly. "You're not the boy I knew. You've become something else, something wrong." He wanted to protest, to explain, to make her understand. But what could he say? That the ring had made him do it? That he couldn't help himself? That he was still the same person underneath? But he wasn't. He knew it, even if he wouldn't admit it. The ring had hollowed him out, had replaced everything good in him with hunger and need, and the constant gnawing fear that someone would take his precious away. "You have to leave," someone said. Not his grandmother. She couldn't bring herself to say it. But others could. Others who had once been neighbors, friends, family. "You can't stay here anymore. You're not welcome." Exile. Banishment from the only home he had ever known, from the river he had loved, from the community that had raised him, from the life he had lived for all his years before that terrible birthday. He should have thrown the ring away then, should have recognized it for what it was, the source of his corruption, the thing that had destroyed everything good in his life, should have hurled it back into the river and begged for forgiveness, for a chance to start again. But he didn't, couldn't. The very thought of parting with it was physically painful, impossible to even seriously consider. Lose his precious? Never, never. He would give up anything, everything, before he would give up the ring. So Sméagol left, turned his back on his grandmother's tears, on the village that had been his world, on the last remnants of his old life, and he went into the wild places, into the dark places, seeking somewhere he could be alone with his precious. He found caves in the foothills of the misty mountains, dark, damp places where water dripped and stone echoed, and no one would bother him, where he could take out his ring and look at it for hours, turning it in his fingers, marveling at its beauty, feeling its weight, its rightness, its preciousness. At first, he would still venture out during the day, would hunt and fish, would gather what food he could from the wild, would maintain some connection to the world above. But the sun began to hurt his eyes. The light seemed too bright, too harsh. It made him uncomfortable, made his skin prickle, made the ring feel heavier somehow. It was easier to stay in the caves during the day, to only emerge at night when the moon and stars gave a gentler light, when the world was quiet and he could move unseen. His eyes began to change, growing larger, more sensitive to darkness, better suited to the depths of caves than to the bright world above. They began to glow with a faint, sickly light of their own, pale and unnatural in the darkness. His skin changed too, pale from lack of sunlight. Yes, but more than that. It took on a strange texture, became clammy and cold to the touch. His body thinned, his muscles wasting from the poor diet and the darkness, until he was gaunt and stretched, barely recognizable as the healthy young hobbit he had been. His diet changed as well. Fish, when he could catch them in the underground pools that connected to the mountain streams, but also other things. Things that lived in the dark, blind fish that had never seen light, insects that crawled in the depths, and sometimes, when hunger was strong, an opportunity presented itself, things that had once been living and warm but were no longer. He stopped cooking his food. Fire hurt his eyes now, and besides, he had no one to cook for, no reason to maintain the civilized habits of his old life. Raw fish, raw meat, crunching through bones and scales and shell. It was easier this way, more direct, more honest, and his voice began to change. He had always talked to himself a little, as people do when they're alone. But now the talking became constant, a running commentary on everything he did, everything he thought, everything he felt. And stranger still, the voice began to split. Sometimes he spoke in the first person as himself. We wants it, we needs it, must have the precious. But sometimes another voice emerged, a voice that was harsher, more suspicious, more consumed by the need for the ring. A voice that argued with the first voice, that disagreed, that saw threats everywhere. They wants to steal it, they does. Mustn't let them. Precious is ours. But we don't knows where they is. We safe here, safe in the dark. Not safe, never safe. They'll come, they'll find us, they'll take it. Back and forth, arguing with himself, debating, quarreling. Two personalities emerging from one, both products of the ring's influence, both aspects of what Sméagol was becoming. And in those conversations with himself, in the dark, wet caves beneath the mountains, a new name emerged. Not a name he chose, but a name that chose him. A name born from the horrible sound he made in his throat when he was agitated or afraid or overcome with desire for the ring. Gollum, Gollum. A gurgling, choking sound, wet and unpleasant. The sound of something drowning or trying to swallow something too large, or simply the sound of a throat that had forgotten how to make proper words. Gollum, Gollum. At first, it was just a sound, a tick, a habit, a noise he made without thinking. But gradually, it became more than that. It became a name, the name by which he would be known, the name that would replace Sméagol in the minds of those few who encountered him in the dark. Gollum, the creature he was becoming, the thing the ring was making him, no longer a hobbit, no longer a person in any meaningful sense, but something else, something that existed only to possess and protect and obsess over a golden ring. Years passed in the darkness. 10 years, 20, 50. Time lost meaning. Seasons were irrelevant in the unchanging dark of the caves. Day and night blurred together. There was only the ring and the hunger and the endless conversations with himself in the dripping dark. His grandmother was dead now, though he didn't know it. Everyone who had known him as Sméagol was dead or had forgotten. The village by the river continued without him, his name barely remembered, his fate unknown and largely uncared about. He was alone, completely, utterly alone, exiled not just from his people, but from light, from warmth, from anything resembling normal life, cut off from everything he had been, everything he might have become, by his choice to keep the ring. But he still had his precious. That was what mattered. That was all that mattered. He would tell himself that in the darkness, when the loneliness threatened to overwhelm him, when some tiny part of him that was still Sméagol cried out for the sun and the river and his grandmother's smile, he had his precious. And that was enough. It had to be enough, because he had nothing else. Gollum, Gollum. The sound echoed in the darkness, the sound of something that was no longer quite alive, no longer quite sane, no longer quite anything except obsessed. The exile was complete. Sméagol was gone. In his place, in the dark beneath the mountains, Gollum lived on, year after year, alone with his precious, decaying slowly into something that would eventually be found by a hobbit on an unexpected journey. But that was still centuries away. For now, there was only the darkness and the ring and the creature that guarded it with everything that remained of his twisted soul. Act 4. The ring's long poison, centuries of corruption. In the roots of the misty mountains, in caverns deep and dark where no light had shone since the world was young, Gollum lived, and lived, and lived. Years became decades, decades became centuries, and still Gollum endured, kept alive by the power of the ring, preserved far beyond any natural span of years. A hobbit-like creature should have lived perhaps 100 years, maybe a little more. But the ring would not let him die, would not let him age beyond a certain point, would not let him escape through the mercy of mortality. 500 years he lived in those caves, 500 years of darkness and fish, and the constant presence of the ring. It sounds like a long time, and it was, impossibly long. But after the first century, after the first few decades even, time began to lose meaning. There were no seasons in the deep places, no spring to mark renewal, no winter to mark endings. The temperature never changed, the darkness never lifted. The slow drip of water, the distant rush of underground rivers, the scuttling of blind things in the dark. These were constant, unchanging, eternal. Days had no meaning. There was no sun to rise or set, no cycle of light and dark to mark the passing of time. Gollum would sleep when he was tired, wake when he was not. Sometimes he might sleep for hours, sometimes for days. There was no way to know, no way to measure, no reason to care. Years blurred together. A decade might pass and feel like a week, or a week might stretch and feel like a year. Without markers, without change, without anything to distinguish one moment from another except the endless sameness of existence, Time became irrelevant. Gollum stopped counting, stopped remembering, stopped caring about anything except the one constant in his life, the one thing that never changed, that was always there, always precious, always his. The ring, my precious. It was the center of everything. His first thought upon waking, his last thought before sleeping. He would take it out and look at it in the darkness, his large pale eyes seeing things that eyes were never meant to see. He would hold it up and watch it catch what little light there was, the faint phosphorescence of certain fungi, the dim glow of his own eyes reflected back at him. He would put it on his finger and vanish, becoming invisible. And in that invisibility, he felt safe, felt powerful, felt that nothing could harm him or take away what was his. He would slip through the caves unseen, would catch fish that could not see him coming, would avoid the goblins that sometimes ventured into the deeper passages. And he would talk to it, constantly, endlessly, conversations that went in circles, that repeated the same thoughts over and over, that never resolved but never ended either. Precious, precious, precious. We loves it, we does. So bright, so beautiful. Ours, our own, our precious. Yes, yes, mustn't lose it. Nasty creatures wants to steal it, they does. But they shan't have it. Never. We keeps it safe. We keeps it secret, hidden in the dark where no one can find it. Precious is safe with us. Safe, yes. Safe and hidden. Forever and ever and ever. The same thoughts, the same words, the same obsessive circling around the ring. His entire existence had contracted to this single point, this one possession, this precious thing that was both his salvation and his damnation. He needed to eat, of course. Even the ring could not sustain him without food. But eating was just a necessity, a chore, something to be done as quickly and efficiently as possible so he could return to what really mattered, the ring. Fish were his primary food, blind fish that lived in the deep pools, that had never known light, that were slow and stupid and easy to catch if you knew how. Gollum became an expert fisher in the dark. He could sense the movement of water, could hear the tiny splashes, could reach down with his long fingers and pluck fish from the pools with barely a ripple. He ate them raw, of course, bit through scales and bone, swallowed them whole if they were small enough. The taste was irrelevant. Food was just fuel, just something to quiet the hunger so it wouldn't distract him from his precious. But there were other things in the deep places too. Goblins, for one. Orcs, as some called them. Foul creatures that had burrowed into the mountains, that built their crude cities in the dark, that raided and fought and killed each other over territory and food and petty grudges. Gollum avoided them mostly, stayed away from their tunnels, their forges, their halls. But sometimes, when he was very hungry, when fish were scarce and his belly cramped with emptiness, he would hunt them, would creep up behind a lone goblin in the dark, would strangle it with his surprisingly strong hands, would drag the body away to a hidden place to feed. It was not just hunger that drove him to this. There was also a kind of hatred, a resentment of anything living that was not him, not his precious. The goblins were intruders in his caves, thieves who took space that should belong to him, and him alone. They deserved what they got. and the meat was meat, better than fish in some ways, more substantial. He told himself he didn't enjoy it, didn't take pleasure in the killing, but deep down, in the parts of himself that were no longer quite sane, there might have been something that did. His body changed to accommodate this life. His posture shifted from upright to a permanent crouch, a skulking, crawling gait that kept him low to the ground, that could navigate the narrow passages and low ceilings of the deep places. His spine curved, his neck thrust forward, his arms grew longer in proportion to his body, better for reaching into crevices, for catching fish, for pulling himself along rough stone. He no longer walked as a person walks. He scuttled like an insect, moved like a spider, all wrong angles and unnatural motions, sometimes on all fours, sometimes in that terrible crouch, sometimes pulling himself along with his hands while his feet scrambled for purchase. The darkness was his home now. More than home, it was his nature. Light hurt him, physically hurt him. On the rare occasions when he ventured near the upper levels of the caves, near places where daylight might penetrate, the pain in his eyes was excruciating. The sun was an enemy, a threat, something to be feared and avoided at all costs. He was completely alone, utterly, totally alone. He had not spoken to another thinking creature in centuries, had not had a conversation, had not shared a thought or a feeling or a moment of connection. There was only himself and the ring, and increasingly that was the same thing. He couldn't exist without the ring. The ring could not exist without him. They were bound together, merged, inseparable. The memory of Sméagol faded, not all at once, but gradually, like a photograph left too long in the sun. He could remember that there had been a before, that he had not always been like this, that once he had been something else. But the details grew fuzzy, uncertain, dreamlike. Had he lived by a river? He thought so, but he couldn't quite picture it. The river in his mind was a dark underground stream, not the bright sunlit Anduin of his youth. Had he had a family? Maybe. There was a sense of loss, of having left something behind, but he couldn't remember what. Couldn't remember faces or names or the feeling of being loved. Had he had another name? Probably. But it didn't matter. He was Gollum now. Had always been Gollum. Would always be Gollum. The other name, if it had existed, was gone, buried under centuries of darkness and obsession. His physical form had become monstrous. The large pale eyes that glowed in the dark, the skin that was no longer skin but something else, something slimy and cold and wrong, the teeth that had become sharp and crooked, better for tearing raw meat, the fingers that were too long, the joints that bent at wrong angles, the body that was stretched and twisted and deformed beyond recognition. If his grandmother could have seen him now, she would not have known him, would have fled in terror from the thing he had become, would have thought him some kind of monster from the old stories, some corrupted creature of the darkness. And she would have been right. His mind, what was left of it, belonged entirely to the ring now. Every thought circled back to it. Every fear was about losing it. Every moment of pleasure came from possessing it. He had no goals beyond keeping it, no desires beyond protecting it, no existence beyond obsessing over it. The dual voices in his head had become sharper, more distinct. Sméagol, when he appeared, was a ghost of what had been, Fearful, whimpering, craving comfort and gentleness, Gollum was the dominant personality, suspicious and vicious, and entirely consumed by the ring. But both were slaves. Both existed only in relation to the precious. They argued over how best to protect it, how to keep it safe, how to prevent it from being stolen. But they never argued about whether to keep it. That was beyond question, beyond debate, beyond even consideration. The ring owned him, completely, utterly. He was not a person anymore. He was a function, a vessel, a tool that the ring used to preserve itself. His life had meaning only insofar as he kept the ring safe. His existence had purpose only in that he prevented others from taking it. 500 years of this, 500 years of darkness and obsession and slow decay, 500 years of talking to himself in the dark, catching blind fish, crawling through stone passages, existing without living, enduring without hope, continuing without purpose beyond the precious. Time dissolved, self dissolved. Everything dissolved except the ring and the need to possess it. If death had come, it might have been a mercy, but the ring would not allow even that escape. It kept him alive, kept him preserved, kept him conscious and aware and suffering, because it needed him, needed someone to hide it, to guard it, to keep it safe in the darkness until such time as it could return to its master. Gollum, Gollum. The sound echoed in the caverns, over and over, year after year, century after century. Gollum, Gollum. The creature lived, if you could call it living, if existence without joy or hope or meaning or anything except obsession could be called life. But he endured, and the ring endured with him, and together they waited in the darkness, neither knowing nor caring what was happening in the world above, in the sunlit lands where people lived real lives and had real thoughts and were real in ways that Gollum had forgotten how to be. Just the darkness, just the ring, just the endless, timeless, meaningless existence of a creature that had once been a person named Sméagol, who had lived by a river and loved his grandmother and had a future ahead of him. All of that was gone now, consumed by the ring, erased by centuries, dissolved into the darkness beneath the mountains. Only Gollum remained. Only the precious remained. Only the obsession remained. Forever and ever and ever in the dark beneath the world, where time meant nothing and hope had died long ago. Act 5. The split mind, Sméagol versus Gollum. Somewhere in those endless centuries, something fractured. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that something that had been fragmenting for a long time finally broke completely apart. The mind cannot sustain that level of isolation, that depth of obsession, that weight of guilt and need and fear, and remain whole. Something has to give. Some part of the self has to split off, has to create distance, has to find a way to survive the unsurvivable. And so Gollum became two people, or rather, one person became two personalities, each distinct, each with their own voice and perspective and relationship to the ring. There was Sméagol. What remained of who he had been, or at least what remembered, having been someone else. The frightened part, The weak part, the part that still somewhere deep down felt guilt for what had been done, what had been lost, what had been traded away for a circle of gold. Sméagol was the submissive self, the one who whimpered and pleaded and wanted to be good, wanted to be loved, wanted things to be different, even though they could never be different. He was the voice of regret, of longing, of the faint ember of humanity that somehow still flickered in the darkness. When Sméagol spoke, his voice was higher, more plaintive, almost childlike. We didn't mean it. We didn't mean to hurt anyone. We're sorry. We is. So sorry. He was the part that remembered dimly that there had been sunlight once, that there had been people who cared about him, that there had been a grandmother who loved him and a friend who had died, and a life that had been lost. But Sméagol was weak, too weak to resist the ring, too weak to let it go, too weak to do anything except exist in a state of perpetual guilt and need. He wanted to be forgiven, but he could not stop doing the things that required forgiveness. He wanted to be free, but he could not imagine existence without the precious. And then there was Gollum, the cruel protector, the dominant personality that had grown strong in the darkness, that had learned how to survive, how to hunt, how to protect the one thing that mattered. Gollum was vicious and suspicious and utterly consumed by the need to keep the ring safe. He saw threats everywhere, enemies in every shadow, thieves waiting to steal what was his. His voice was harsher, more guttural, punctuated by that horrible gurgling sound that had given him his name. Stupid, fat hobbit, tricksy, false. They wants to steal it, precious. They wants to take it from us. But we won't let them. We'll kill them first. Yes, we will. Nasty, tricksy, false. Gollum had no room for guilt or regret. To acknowledge what had been lost would be to acknowledge that keeping the ring might not be worth it. And that thought was intolerable, impossible, too dangerous to even entertain. Better to be angry, to be paranoid, to blame everyone else for trying to take what was rightfully his. Gollum protected Sméagol from the full weight of their crimes by refusing to acknowledge them as crimes at all. Everything that had been done was justified, necessary, right. Sméagol had deserved to die. He had tried to steal the precious. The community had deserved to be left behind. They had tried to take the precious away. The isolation, the darkness, the centuries of misery, all of it was worth it because they still had the precious. And the two argued, constantly, endlessly, conversations that went in circles, that resolved nothing, that were the same conversation they'd had 1,000 times before. "We should leave the caves," Sméagol might say in his whimpering voice. "Go up to where there's light. See the sun again. Be warm." "No," Gollum would snap back. "The sun burns us. The people hates us. They'll steal precious. We stays in the dark where we safe. But we so lonely, so cold, so hungry. We has precious. We doesn't need anything else. Precious is all we needs. But what if we lets it go? What if we leaves it and goes away?" And at this suggestion, both voices would unite in horror. "No, never lets it go. Precious is ours. We kills anyone who tries to take it. We dies before we lets it go. The suggestion of parting with the ring was the one thing both personalities agreed on. It was absolutely, completely, utterly impossible. The ring was not just something they possessed. It was part of them, more than part of them. It was the only part that mattered. There was a terrible cycle to the relationship between Sméagol and Gollum. Self-hatred and self-love existing in the same twisted psyche, directed at the same object. Sméagol hated what he had become, hated Gollum for being cruel and vicious and everything he had never meant to be. But Sméagol also needed Gollum because Sméagol was too weak to survive on his own, too gentle to hunt goblins or defend the precious or do what needed to be done. Gollum despised Sméagol for being weak, for feeling guilt, for sometimes questioning whether all of this was worth it. But Gollum also needed Sméagol because without that small part that was still capable of something other than obsession, there would be nothing left at all, just pure hunger, with no personality behind it, no self to do the hungering. They were locked together, dependent on each other, unable to exist separately, but unable to coexist peacefully. A mind at war with itself, forever and always, with no possibility of resolution. And beneath it all, binding them both, consuming them both, was the absolute dependence on the ring. It was not just that they loved the ring, though they did, with an intensity that went beyond any normal affection. It was not just that they needed it, though they did, with a desperation that was physical and psychological and spiritual all at once. It was that the ring had become their identity. Without it, they did not know who they were. Without it, there was no purpose, no meaning, no reason to continue existing. The ring was the answer to every question, the solution to every problem, the center around which everything else orbited. Who are we? The answer was the keeper of the precious. What do we want? The answer was to keep the precious safe. Why do we live? The answer was to possess the precious. Every thought, every emotion, every fragment of consciousness was filtered through the ring. They could not think about food without thinking about how eating would give them strength to protect the precious. They could not sleep without dreaming of the precious. They could not wake without immediately checking that the precious was still there, still safe, still theirs. The fear of losing it was overwhelming, all-consuming, worse than any physical pain. The thought of the ring being taken, being stolen, being claimed by someone else, it produced a panic so intense it was paralyzing. A terror so deep it went beyond reason, beyond sanity, beyond anything except pure existential dread. This was not a normal attachment. This was not even a normal addiction. This was something that had rewired the fundamental architecture of the mind, that had replaced every natural drive and desire with a single, monolithic obsession. And the paranoia that came with this was exhausting. Everyone was a potential thief. Every sound was a potential threat. Every shadow might hide someone who wanted to take the precious. Constant vigilance, constant suspicion, constant fear. When goblins passed through his territory, he would hide, clutching the ring, convinced they could sense it, could smell it, could somehow know it was there, and would search until they found it. When he heard voices in the passages above, travelers or adventurers who had lost their way in the mountains. He would flee deeper into the earth, away from anyone who might see him, might question him, might discover what he possessed. Even alone, even in the depths where no one had been in centuries, he was never truly at ease. Always checking, always worrying, always asking himself, is it safe? Is precious safe? Have we hidden it well enough? Should we move it? Should we check again? And he would check, would take the ring out of wherever he was keeping it, sometimes in his pocket, sometimes hidden in a crack in the rock, sometimes clutched in his hand as he slept, and would look at it, would hold it, would put it on his finger and feel the rush of security that came with invisibility. The ring was safe because he could make himself disappear. No one could catch him if they couldn't see him. No one could take the precious if he was invisible. But even that security was temporary. The fear would creep back in. What if the ring could be sensed even when he was invisible? What if someone had magic that could find it? What if? The talking to himself, which had started as a way to fill the silence, had become a necessity, a way to process thoughts, to have the arguments between Sméagol and Gollum, to reassure himself that the precious was safe, that he was in control, that everything was fine, even when nothing was fine. We has it, yes we has it. Precious is ours, safe with us. But what if something happens? What if we loses it? We won't lose it. We's careful, we his, we watches over it, forever and ever. Forever is so long. We so tired. Doesn't matter. We as precious. That's all that matters. Back and forth, endless circles of thought. The same conversation repeated with minor variations day after day, year after year, century after century. To an outside observer, if there had been one, it would have seemed like madness. And perhaps it was madness, in a clinical sense, a complete break from reality, a personality fractured beyond repair, a mind that had lost the ability to function in any normal way. But to Gollum, to both Gollums, it was simply existence. This was how things were. This was how they had always been, for so long that he could barely remember anything else. This was normal. The tragedy was not that he had gone mad. The tragedy was that beneath the madness, beneath the obsession, beneath the corruption, there was still something that knew dimly that this was wrong, that this was not how life should be, that he had traded everything real for something empty, had given up the sun and the river and love and friendship and hope for a piece of metal that gave nothing back except the need to possess it. Sméagol knew this. In his weakest moments, in the depths of the night, when the fear was strongest and the loneliness was unbearable, he knew. But knowing changed nothing. The ring would not let him go, and he could not let the ring go. They were bound together, prisoner and prison, victim and torturer, slave and master all at once. The split mind continued its endless argument. Sméagol and Gollum, two voices in one broken consciousness, fighting and needing each other, hating and depending on each other, united only in their absolute devotion to the precious. And the precious sat there, golden and innocent, saying nothing, doing nothing except existing, being wanted, being needed, being loved with a love that was really slavery, really madness, really the slow poison that had dissolved a person and left only this, a creature talking to itself in the dark, guarding a ring that guarded nothing, protecting a treasure that had destroyed everything worth protecting. Tragic, pitiable, monstrous, all of these things at once. Not evil, perhaps, but consumed by evil. Not wicked by choice, but made wicked by obsession. Not a villain, but a victim who had become victimizer, who had become victim again, trapped in a cycle that had no end and no escape. Gollum, Gollum, Sméagol and Gollum. Two voices, one ruined mind. And the ring that had broken it, sitting in the darkness, waiting, patient and eternal, for whatever would come next. Act 6, the riddle game. Fate intervenes. After 5 centuries of undisturbed darkness, something changed. Someone came. Gollum heard him before he saw him. Footsteps in the tunnels, soft but clumsy, uncertain. Not the heavy tread of goblins or the scuttling of the things that lived in the deep places. Something else, something that didn't belong here. Gollum crept forward, silent as shadow, his large pale eyes seeing perfectly in the absolute darkness. And there, stumbling through a passage near his island in the underground lake, was a creature he had not seen in living memory. A hobbit, small, well-fed, wearing proper clothes and carrying a sword, as if he knew how to use it, lost, clearly, frightened, probably, and alone, so beautifully, vulnerably alone. Gollum's mind raced. This was unexpected, dangerous perhaps, but also opportunity. The creature might have food, might have things worth taking, and if it wandered too close to the precious, if it somehow threatened what was most important, well, Gollum knew how to deal with that. He approached in his boat, a small crude thing he had made from driftwood and scavenged materials. The Hobbit, Bilbo was his name, though Gollum didn't know that yet, had drawn his sword, was trying to look brave despite his obvious terror. Something in Gollum hesitated, a curiosity, perhaps, a loneliness so deep that even a potential threat was interesting simply because it was someone, something other than himself. He hadn't spoken to another living thing in so long, hadn't played games, hadn't matched wits, hadn't done anything except talk to himself in circles. "What is it, precious?" he hissed, his voice rusty from disuse for anything except talking to himself. What does it want? And somehow, through fear or cleverness or simple desperation, the conversation turned into something unexpected. A game, a riddle game. It was an old tradition, older than Gollum's exile, something he remembered from before. When faced with a stranger in the dark, you could challenge them to riddles, a civilized way to determine fate, to test intelligence, to pass time. Winner gets what they want, loser pays the price. Gollum suggested the terms, his mind already working, already planning. If the Hobbit won, Gollum would show him the way out. But if Gollum won, then he would eat the nice juicy Hobbit, fresh meat, a real meal, not blind fish or the occasional goblin. And the game began. Gollum was confident. He had spent centuries in the dark, with nothing to do but think, remember. turn over old rhymes and riddles in his mind. He knew hundreds of them, thousands perhaps. This soft creature from the surface couldn't possibly match him. What has roots as nobody sees is taller than trees. Up, up it goes, and yet never grows. The Hobbit struggled, but eventually answered, "Mountain." Gollum was impressed, despite himself. Clever Hobbit, but not clever enough. They traded riddles back and forth, each more difficult than the last. Gollum was enjoying this, actually enjoying something for the first time in living memory. The challenge, the back and forth, the mental exercise. But something was wrong, something he couldn't quite identify. A nagging feeling, an absence, a wrongness that he couldn't place. His hand kept going to his pocket, a nervous habit, checking that the precious was there, that it was safe. Except it wasn't there. The pocket was empty. At first, he dismissed it. He must have left it in his hiding place. Yes, that must be it. He'd hidden it before coming to investigate the intruder. It was safe, tucked away on his island. The riddle game continued. The Hobbit was doing better than expected, answering questions that should have stumped him, asking riddles that were genuinely challenging. Gollum's confidence began to waver slightly, but he was still certain of victory. And then the Hobbit asked his final riddle. "What have I got in my pocket?" It wasn't a proper riddle. It was hardly a riddle at all, just a question. Gollum protested, demanded 3 guesses as was fair, but even as he guessed, Hans's, knife, string or nothing, that nagging wrongness grew stronger. His pocket was empty. His precious wasn't in his pocket. Where was it? Where was his precious? The Hobbit had won the game, technically, through an unfair riddle. But Gollum barely registered this. All he could think about was the precious. He had to check, had to know for certain, had to find it. "Just a minute," he said, paddling his boat back toward his island, toward the little hiding place where he kept the ring when he wasn't carrying it. "We goes and get something for the nice Hobbit, something nice. Yes, yes, just wait right there." But his mind was racing now, panic beginning to set in. Something was wrong, very wrong. The precious wasn't in his pocket, but it was safe on the island. It had to be safe on the island. He always kept it there when he went hunting or exploring. It was always there, always safe, always. He reached the hiding place, a crack in the rock, a little hollow where the ring should have been resting. Empty. The panic that seized him was beyond description, beyond anything he had ever felt, worse than hunger or pain or fear of death. The precious was gone. The precious was gone. Where is it? Where is it? His voice rose to a shriek, hands scrabbling at the rock as if the ring might somehow be hiding deeper in the crack, as if he had simply missed it. "Where is the precious? Where is it?" But it wasn't there. It wasn't anywhere. He tore through his little island, searching every crevice, every shadow, every possible place it could have fallen or rolled or been hidden. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Lost, lost. Curse us and crush us. We've lost it. The precious is lost. And then, through the panic, through the terror, a thought formed. The Hobbit. The Hobbit had been asking about pockets. What have I got in my pocket? That wasn't just a bad riddle. That was That was the Hobbit had it. The Hobbit had found his precious. Must have found it somewhere in the tunnels. Must have picked it up and put it in his nasty little pocket. The thief, the filthy, sneaking thief. All pretense of the game, of civilization, of anything except pure need vanished. Gollum leapt back into his boat and rowed toward where he'd left the Hobbit. Murder in his heart. He would kill the thief, would strangle him as he'd strangled Sméagol all those centuries ago, would take back what was his, would make the Hobbit pay for this violation, this theft, this unbearable crime. But when he got there, the Hobbit was gone, or seemed to be gone. Gollum searched frantically, following the only path the Hobbit could have taken, the passage that led toward the Goblin Gates, toward the outside world. And as he ran, he talked to himself, the dual voices arguing, panicking, trying to understand what had happened. It's lost, lost. What has it got in his pockets? We ought to have guessed. But how did the nasty little thief get it? How did it find the precious? Doesn't matter. We has to get it back. We kills the thief and takes back what's ours. He could sense it now, somehow. The ring called to him, or he to it, or they to each other. A connection that transcended space, that let him know which direction to go, which tunnels to follow. The Hobbit was ahead of him, running, trying to escape, and Gollum pursued, all stealth abandoned, simply running with desperate speed toward the gates, toward the outside, toward the precious. But something happened that Gollum didn't understand, couldn't understand. He reached the gate, the place where the goblins stood guard, and there, standing in the shadows, he should have been able to see the Hobbit, should have been able to catch him, kill him, take back the precious. But he couldn't see him. The Hobbit was there. Gollum could sense the ring, could almost smell it, but he was invisible, gone, untouchable. And in that moment, Gollum understood. The Hobbit had put it on, had discovered what the ring could do, had used it to escape, was using Gollum's own precious against him. The rage was overwhelming, but so was the fear. The goblins were stirring, alerted by the commotion, and beyond the gates was the outside world, sunlight, open spaces, things that Gollum had avoided for centuries, things that hurt and frightened him almost as much as losing the precious. He stood at the threshold, torn between the need to pursue and the fear of what lay beyond. And he felt the ring moving away, felt the distance growing, felt the Hobbit escaping into the world above. Thief, Baggins, we hate it forever. The name had come out during the riddle game, and now Gollum screamed it at the darkness, a curse and a promise. We hate it, we hate it, we hate it. But the Hobbit was gone, and the ring was gone, and Gollum was left at the gates of the mountain, alone, bereft, more broken than he had ever been in 5 centuries of corruption. He didn't know, couldn't have known, that in that moment, fate had turned. That Bilbo Baggins, standing invisible by the gates, had thought about killing Gollum, had raised his sword, had considered putting an end to this miserable creature that had tried to murder him. But something had stopped him. Pity, perhaps the most important moment of pity in all the history of Middle-earth. Bilbo had looked at this wretched thing and felt not just fear or disgust, but compassion, had recognized something broken and sad beneath the monster, had chosen mercy over murder, had stepped past Gollum and left him alive. That choice, that moment of pity, would echo through the years to come, would matter in ways that neither of them could possibly foresee, would, in the end, determine the fate of the world. But Gollum knew none of this. He knew only that the precious was gone, that the thief had escaped, that his entire existence had been shattered in a single night. He retreated back into the tunnels, back toward his island, moving like something already dead. The goblins had been roused by all the commotion, were hunting through the passages, and Gollum wanted no part of them. He fled deeper, away from the gates, away from the outside world, back into the darkness that was all he had left. He curled up on his island, in the place where the precious should have been, and he wept, or made sounds that might have been weeping, if weeping could sound like drowning. 500 years of guarding the ring, 500 years of obsession and isolation and corruption, and in one night, one game, one moment of carelessness, it was all gone. He had lost the only thing that mattered, the only thing that gave his existence meaning, the only thing that was truly his. We must get it back, precious. We must. We must. But how? How does we find it? How does we find the thief? Baggins. The thief's name is Baggins. Shire, he said. Baggins in the Shire. It wasn't much, but it was something, a name, a place, a thread to follow when the grief became less overwhelming, when the shock faded enough to allow for planning, for hunting, for revenge. For now, there was only loss, only emptiness, only the terrible absence where the precious had been, like a wound that would never heal, like a hunger that could never be satisfied. Gollum curled tighter, rocking back and forth, making that horrible sound in his throat. Gollum, Gollum, the sound of something broken beyond repair, the sound of something that had just lost the only thing keeping it alive, the sound of a creature abandoned in the dark, with nothing left but the memory of what it had possessed and the desperate, hopeless need to somehow, someday, get it back. Act 7. The hunt begins, a creature unleashed. For a time, days, weeks, perhaps months, Gollum simply existed in his grief. He returned to his old patterns, catching fish, crawling through the familiar passages. But everything was hollow now, empty. The precious was gone. And without it, nothing had meaning. But grief, even overwhelming grief, eventually gives way to something else. In Gollum's case, it gave way to determination, to obsession refocused. He had spent 500 years guarding the ring. Now he would spend however long it took hunting for it. He had information, not much, but enough. Baggins, the Shire, the thief, had let these words slip during their riddle game, had revealed where he came from, and had given Gollum the trail he needed. And so, for the first time in centuries, Gollum left the mountains. It was agony. The sun burned his eyes, forced him to travel only at night or in heavy cloud cover. The open spaces terrified him after so long in enclosed caves. The world had changed in ways he didn't understand. New settlements, new roads, new dangers he had never encountered. But he kept going, driven by need, by the pull of the ring that still called to him across the distance, faint but undeniable. He could feel it, somewhere out there, his precious, waiting for him. He tracked Bilbo across the Wilderland, following rumors, following the faint sense of the ring's presence, following his desperate hope. He learned to hunt in the outside world again, to find hiding places during the day, to avoid the people and creatures that would have killed him on sight if they discovered him. The journey took years. Gollum had no concept of time anymore, but the seasons turned again and again as he crept slowly westward, through forests and over rivers, always moving, always searching, always driven by the need to find what had been stolen from him. And somewhere along that journey, he was noticed by forces far greater and more terrible than a lone hobbit with a magic ring. Sauron's servants had been searching for information about the ring for years. They knew it existed, knew it had been lost, knew that whoever found it would become crucial to their master's plans. And when whispers reached them of a strange creature asking about hobbits and a place called the Shire, asking about something precious that had been stolen, they became very interested indeed. Gollum was captured in the Dead Marshes, that terrible swamp east of the Black Gate, where the bodies of ancient battles lay preserved in the dark water. He had been creeping through the marshes, following some trail or sense that had led him there, when they came for him. The servants of Sauron, dark riders, fell voices, terror-given form. They brought him to Mordor, to Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower, to the dungeons where Sauron's will was enforced through torment that could break even the strongest minds. And they questioned him, not with simple violence, that would have been mercy, with pain designed to last, to persist, to drive all thought except the need to make it stop from the victim's mind. Tell us of the ring, they demanded. Tell us where it is. Tell us who has it. Gollum tried to resist, tried to keep his secrets, to protect the precious, even from these terrible interrogators. But no one could withstand that kind of torture for long. Eventually, inevitably, he broke. He told them what he knew. Baggins, the Shire, a hobbit who had stolen his precious in the darkness beneath the mountains. He didn't know exactly where the Shire was. He had never reached it, had been captured before completing his hunt. But he knew the name, and for Sauron's purposes, that was enough. The torture didn't stop when he told them. It continued, digging deeper, trying to extract every scrap of information he possessed. They wanted to know about the ring itself, about what it could do, about how long he had possessed it. And in the midst of that questioning, in the depths of his torment, they took something else from him, a finger, cut off deliberately, slowly, a reminder of what they could do, what they had already done, what they would continue to do if he didn't cooperate fully. The pain was nothing compared to the loss of the ring, but it was real nonetheless. Another piece of himself taken away, another mark of the price he had paid for the precious. When they finally released him, when they had extracted everything they could and decided he was no longer useful, Gollum fled from Mordor with a hatred burning in him almost as hot as his need for the ring. He hated Sauron, hated the Dark Lord who had caused him such pain, who had stolen his secrets, who had treated him as nothing more than a tool to be used and discarded. The ring was Sauron's creation, yes, but it was his now. The Dark Lord had no right to it, no claim on it, no business demanding information about it. But even that hatred paled beside the pull of the ring itself. Even broken, even tortured, even minus a finger and carrying scars that would never heal, Gollum could still feel the precious, could still sense its presence somewhere in the world, could still hear its call, faint but persistent. And now he knew where to look. The Shire. He had told Sauron had betrayed the information under torture, but that didn't matter now. What mattered was finding the ring, reaching it before Sauron's servants did, taking it back before the thief could give it to the Dark Lord or hide it somewhere. Gollum could never find it. He resumed his hunt, but now he was not just the hunter, he was also the hunted. Sauron's servants were searching for the ring, and they knew Gollum had information about it. They wanted him found, wanted him brought back if he'd learned anything new, or simply killed if he became inconvenient. And the forces of good were looking for him too, though Gollum didn't fully understand this. Gandalf had learned of his existence, had pieced together the story of the ring's finding and Gollum's connection to it. The wizard wanted Gollum found as well, wanted to question him, to learn more about the ring and its history. Rangers of the North were given the task of hunting a creature matching Gollum's description. A twisted thing that crept through the wild places, asking questions about hobbits, searching for something precious. For years, Gollum evaded them all. He was cunning, experienced in hiding, able to sense danger and slip away before it could close around him. He had survived 500 years in the depths of the mountains. Surviving in the wild, even hunted, was difficult but not impossible. But eventually, inevitably, his luck ran out. Aragorn, the greatest of the Rangers, had been tracking him for months, following rumors, reading signs that others missed, narrowing down the search area with patient, relentless determination. He knew the wild places as well as anyone living, knew how a creature like Gollum would think, where he would hide, what paths he would take. And one night, in the dead marshes where Gollum had first been captured by Sauron's servants, Aragorn found him again. Gollum fought, not with skill or strength, but with desperate feral fury, biting, scratching, trying to slip free of the hands that held him. But Aragorn was stronger, faster, more experienced in combat, and Aragorn had companions, other rangers who helped bind the struggling creature, who ignored his shrieks and threats and pleas. Let us go, we hasn't done nothing. Precious is ours, thief stole it, nasty thief, let us go. But they didn't let him go. They bound him, carefully but firmly, and began the long journey north to Mirkwood, where the elves would hold him, and where Gandalf could question him about the ring and its history. Gollum wept as they traveled, wept and cursed and begged and threatened by turns. The rangers showed him neither cruelty nor kindness, simply keeping him secure, keeping him moving, treating him as what he was, a prisoner being delivered for questioning. And all the while, Gollum could feel the ring, closer now than it had been in years. Somewhere to the west, in the Shire, the Precious waited. He had been so close. If he had just been faster, more careful, if he hadn't been caught, he might have found it by now, might have held it again, might have felt its weight on his finger, might have known again the joy of possession. But instead, he was captured, bound, being taken somewhere against his will, away from the precious, away from his quest, away from everything that mattered. The journey seemed endless, through marshes and forests, across rivers and over hills. Gollum grew weaker, fed only enough to keep him alive, given water but no comfort, treated as a dangerous thing that needed to be contained. And in his mind, the two voices argued, as they always argued. This is Baggins's fault. The thief brought this on us. If it hadn't stolen Precious, we'd still be safe in our cave. But we hates the cave now, don't we, Precious? We wants the ring back. We does. We wants our Precious. We'll never get it now. They's taking us away. They'll lock us up forever. No, we'll escape. We's clever. We is. We'll get away and find the Precious. We must. We must. But as the miles passed and Mirkwood grew closer, even Gollum's desperate optimism began to fade. He had been hunting for so long, had endured so much, had come so close to finding the ring again. And now he was captured, prisoner of those who would keep him from his Precious. Locked away while the ring remained out in the world, possessed by the thief, worn by someone who didn't deserve it, loved by someone who could never love it as much as Gollum did. The creature that had left the Misty Mountains years ago, driven by need and determination, arrived at the borders of Mirkwood, broken once more, defeated not by strength, but by circumstance, hunted when he should have been hunting, caught when he should have been catching. And the Precious, his Precious, was further away than ever, out of reach behind walls and guards and questions he would eventually have to answer. Gollum had left the mountains to hunt. Instead, he had been hunted, had been captured, had been broken again by forces he couldn't fight, and all he could do was weep and curse and whisper to himself in the darkness of his captivity. Precious, Precious, we'll come back for you. We promises. We'll escape and find you and never let you go again. Never, never, never. But the promises sounded hollow even to him. And as the elves of Mirkwood took custody of him, as he was locked in their prisons, as Gandalf prepared to question him about things he didn't want to reveal, Gollum felt hope slipping away. The hunt had ended, not in triumph, but in capture, and the Precious remained lost. Act 8, A Chance at Redemption, The Broken Guide. In the halls of the woodland realm, deep in Mirkwood, Gollum sat in captivity and faced something he had not faced in centuries. Questions, real questions, asked by someone who genuinely wanted to understand. Gandalf came to him in the dungeons. The wizard who had been searching for him, who had pieced together the story of the ring, who needed to know what Gollum knew. And Gandalf did not come with torture or threats. He came with patience, with wisdom, with a willingness to listen. The interrogation was gentle, as such things went. Gandalf asked about the ring, about how Gollum had found it, about what it could do. He asked about Bilbo, about the riddle game, about the name Baggins and the Shire. He pieced together the history that Gollum himself barely remembered clearly, sorting truth from madness, facts from obsession. And something strange happened. In speaking to someone who listened without cruelty, in answering questions that weren't accompanied by pain, something in Gollum shifted. Not dramatically, not completely, but enough to matter. Sméagol began to emerge again. Not the dominant voice, but present in a way he hadn't been in years. The part of him that remembered being a person, that could still feel something other than need and hatred and fear. "We didn't mean to hurt Daegol," Sméagol's voice whispered when Gandalf asked about how he'd obtained the ring. "It was the precious. It made us do it. We're sorry, so sorry." Gandalf saw it, saw the split in Gollum's mind, saw the tiny spark of something that might still be redeemable, buried deep beneath the corruption. He couldn't undo what the ring had done, couldn't heal 5 centuries of damage. But he noted it, remembered it, filed it away as important. Eventually, Gollum escaped. The elves were kind captors as far as such things went, but they couldn't watch him every moment. And Gollum was cunning, patient, willing to wait for the smallest opportunity. When it came, he took it, slipping away into the forest, fleeing once more toward the west, toward the precious. But the world had changed while he'd been imprisoned. The ring had been found again, not by him, but by those hunting for it. It was moving, being carried by a new bearer. And that bearer was being hunted by forces far more terrible than Gollum. When Gollum finally found the trail again, when he finally caught up to the ring, what he found was not what he expected. Hobbits, 2 of them, one carrying the ring. He could sense it, feel its presence like a warmth against his consciousness, and another accompanying him. They were traveling through dangerous lands, heading toward Mordor itself, for some reason Gollum couldn't fathom. He followed them. Of course he followed them. They had his precious. Where else would he go? But something was different this time. The Hobbit carrying the ring, Frodo was his name, did not react to Gollum the way others had. When Gollum was finally caught, bound by the rope they carried, forced to face his captors, Frodo did something unexpected. He showed kindness, not trust exactly, not foolishness, but a recognition that Gollum was not just a monster, but a creature suffering under the weight of the ring. Frodo, who was beginning to feel that weight himself, who was starting to understand the terrible pull of the precious, saw in Gollum something pitiable rather than simply hateful. "You were like me once, weren't you?" Frodo said quietly, looking into Gollum's pale, luminous eyes. "Before the ring found you, you were someone else." And Sméagol, deep inside, wept at being seen, at being recognized as having been a person once, at not being immediately condemned or rejected or treated as nothing but a threat. The other hobbit, Sam, was not so sympathetic. He saw Gollum as dangerous, as evil, as something that would betray them at the first opportunity. He watched Gollum with constant suspicion, kept his hand near his sword, made it clear he trusted nothing about this creature. And he wasn't wrong to be suspicious. Gollum was planning betrayal. Of course he was. They had his precious. They were keeping it from him. Every moment in their presence was agony, being so close to the ring but unable to take it, unable to claim what was rightfully his. But Frodo made him swear an oath. "Swear by the precious," Frodo commanded, understanding somehow that this was the only oath Gollum would take seriously. Swear to serve the master of the precious. And Gollum swore, not willingly, but binding himself nonetheless. "We swears to serve the master of the precious. We swears on the precious." It was a clever oath. It bound Gollum not to Frodo directly, but to whoever held the ring. As long as Frodo bore it, Gollum was oath-bound to serve him, and oath-breaking, even for Gollum, even corrupted as he was, carried a weight that was hard to ignore. And so, Gollum became their guide. He knew the lands they needed to cross, knew the paths through the dead marshes and the mountains, knew ways that others had forgotten or never known. He could lead them toward Mordor, could help them avoid the worst dangers, could be useful despite his treachery. Through the dead marshes they went, that terrible swampland where the dead of ancient battles lay preserved in the dark water. Gollum led them through, warning them not to look at the corpse lights, not to fall into the pools, to follow exactly where he stepped. And for a time, something remarkable happened. Sméagol began to emerge more strongly. The kindness Frodo showed, the recognition of his personhood, the trust placed in him despite everything, it fed that small part of him that was still capable of being something other than corrupted. "We helps them," Sméagol's voice said, almost surprised by the thought. "Nice master, kind master, not like the others who hurts us." He began to care about Frodo in his twisted way, began to want to serve him genuinely, not just because of the oath, but because Frodo had shown him a glimpse of what it meant to be treated as a person rather than a monster. But the balance was fragile, so fragile. Sam's distrust didn't help. Every suspicious look, every harsh word, every reminder that Gollum was not trusted and never would be, it fed the darker part of him, fed Gollum's anger, Gollum's resentment, Gollum's certainty that they would betray him eventually, so he should betray them first. The two voices argued constantly now, more fiercely than they had in years. "We helps them. Master is kind to us. We swore on the precious. They tricks us. They keeps the precious from us. We should take it when they sleeps. No, we made a promise. We doesn't break promises on the precious. But it's ours. It's always been ours. The master stole it, just like the other thief." Back and forth, the internal war raging with every step they took toward Mordor, and Frodo, bearing the ring, could sense some of this conflict, could see that Gollum was fighting himself, that redemption was possible if unlikely, that the creature could still choose to be Sméagol rather than Gollum. There was a moment, one single, shining moment, when it almost worked. They had stopped to rest. Frodo was sleeping, and Gollum crept close to look at him. Not to steal the ring, not to murder him, but simply to look. And in that moment, seeing Frodo's peaceful face, seeing someone who trusted him enough to sleep near him, something shifted in Gollum. Sméagol reached out, almost touched Frodo's hair with a gesture that might have been tender, might have been the ghost of affection from the person he had been centuries ago. "Master looks so peaceful," Sméagol whispered. "So kind to us. We could be good again, couldn't we? we could help Master and be good. For that moment, redemption hung in the balance. For that moment, it seemed possible that Sméagol could win the war for his own soul, could choose kindness over corruption, could find a path back to something resembling the person he had been. But Sam woke, saw Gollum reaching toward Frodo, and immediately assumed the worst. "Get away from him," Sam shouted, shoving Gollum back roughly. "Don't you touch him. I knew you were up to something, sneaking around like that." The moment shattered. The fragile hope that had been building in Sméagol's heart broke like glass. He had been trying to be good, and what had it earned him? Suspicion, rejection, violence. Gollum's voice returned in force. Sees what they thinks of us. They hates us. They'll never trust us. We's just a slave to them. We is something to use and throw away. But Master Frodo is kind. Master lets the Fat One treat us like this. Master doesn't defend us. It's all the same. The balance tipped, not completely, not irrevocably, but significantly. The path to redemption that had seemed so close suddenly receded. The anger and resentment and betrayal bubbled up stronger than before. Sméagol withdrew into himself, hurt and confused, and Gollum grew stronger, fed by the rejection, by the proof that kindness was just a trick, that they would never really accept him, that the only thing he could trust was his need for the precious. But still, he led them, still bound by the oath, still serving despite the growing resentment, through the dead marshes, toward the Black Gate, along paths that would take them ever closer to Mordor and to whatever fate awaited them there. The redemption was still possible. The spark hadn't gone completely out, but it was dimmer now, harder to see, obscured by the return of old patterns, old hatreds, old certainties that trust was foolish and kindness was weakness. Frodo saw it happening, saw Gollum retreating, saw Sméagol fading, and perhaps he would have tried harder to reach that broken creature, to strengthen the fragile bond they had built, but the ring was growing heavier with every step toward Mordor. Frodo's own corruption was beginning, his own obsession starting to mirror what had happened to Gollum centuries before. And so the journey continued, the broken guide leading the breaking bearer, two creatures bound to the same ring, one corrupted for centuries, the other just beginning to feel the poison work through his veins. The chance at redemption remained. Slim, fragile, barely there. But it remained. Whether it would be seized or lost entirely depended on choices not yet made, moments not yet arrived at, a future that hung uncertain in the balance. For now, they walked together through dangerous lands, master and servant, bearer and guide, Frodo and Gollum, each carrying their own burden, each fighting their own battle with the ring that bound them both. And ahead lay Mordor, and choices that would determine not just Gollum's fate, but the fate of all Middle-earth. Act 9. Betrayal and obsession. The final choice. There was another path to Mordor, a secret way that few knew about, that even the Dark Lord's servants had forgotten or dismissed. A tunnel through the mountains, dark and winding, that would bypass the Black Gate entirely. Gollum knew about it, had discovered it in his wanderings, in his desperate search for the ring. 'ring. And he knew what dwelt there, knew it intimately, knew its knew its hunger, knew its terrible patience. Shelob, the great spider, ancient and evil, caring for nothing except to feed on whatever living things wandered into her lair. And Gollum had made a bargain with her, though bargain was perhaps too generous a word. He had brought her food before, orcs, travellers, anyone foolish enough to enter her domain. In exchange, she let him pass, let him live, let him use the tunnels when he needed to. Now he would bring her the hobbits, or at least he would bring her one of them. Let Shelob feast on their flesh. Let her wrap them in webs and drain them dry. And in the chaos, in the aftermath, Gollum would take the ring from their corpses. It was perfect. He wouldn't even have to break his oath, not technically. He wasn't killing them himself. He was simply leading them along a path. What happened in that path was not his fault. The precious would be his again, and his hands would be clean. That's what Gollum told himself. That's what Gollum's voice whispered constantly as they approached the pass of Cirith Ungol, drowning out any protests Smeagol might have made. "Master has been kind to us," Sméagol said weakly, a last attempt at resistance. "We shouldn't." "Master keeps the precious from us," Gollum snarled back. "Master makes us a slave, and the fat one, he hates us, calls us names, treats us like vermin. They deserves what they get. But we swore to serve the master of the precious. Once we has it back, we is the master. We didn't break the oath. We's just taking back what's ours." The logic was twisted, circular, obviously false to anyone thinking clearly. But Gollum wasn't thinking clearly. The ring was so close, worn around Frodo's neck, so near that Gollum could almost feel it, could almost taste it. The obsession had grown overwhelming, drowning out everything else: mercy, gratitude, even basic self-preservation. He led them into Shelob's lair, into the darkness that smelled of rot and death, where webs hung thick as curtains and bones littered the floor. Frodo trusted him still, even Sam's suspicions momentarily quieted by exhaustion and the overwhelming need to keep moving forward. And when Shelob came, when the great spider descended upon them with her poison and her hunger, Gollum fled, ran away into the darkness, while behind him he could hear Frodo crying out, could hear Sam shouting, could hear the terrible sounds of the attack. He waited in the shadows, hands trembling with anticipation. Soon it would be over. Soon Shelob would have her feast, and he would have his precious. Soon, soon, soon. But it didn't go as planned. It never went as planned. Sam fought. The fat hobbit that Gollum had dismissed as weak and useless fought the great spider with a courage that seemed impossible. Used the star glass that Galadriel had given Frodo. Burned Shelob with light that she could not endure. Drove her back wounded and furious into her deepest lairs. And Frodo was stung but not dead, wrapped in webs but still breathing, still alive when the orcs came, when they took him away, thinking he was dead but keeping him anyway because that was their orders. Bring any suspicious persons to the tower. Gollum watched from hiding as they carried Frodo away, watched as Sam, thinking his master dead, took the ring. For a moment, everything in Gollum screamed to attack, to kill the fat hobbit and take what was his. But Sam had the ring now. Sam was the master of the precious, at least temporarily, and Gollum's oath still bound him, twisted though his interpretation of it was. Besides, Sam was also heading toward Mordor, following the orcs who had taken Frodo, which meant Sam was heading in the direction Gollum needed to go anyway. Easier to follow, to wait, to watch for an opportunity. And so began the final stalking, the last pursuit. Gollum followed Sam into Mordor itself, into the very heart of the enemy's domain, through the land of ash and fire, across plains where nothing lived and nothing grew, always keeping just out of sight, always watching, always waiting. When Sam rescued Frodo from the tower, when the ring returned to its original bearer, Gollum was there, in the shadows, following them as they began their final journey toward Mount Doom, toward the fire where the ring had been forged and where it could be destroyed. Destroyed, the thought was unbearable. They meant to destroy his precious, not keep it, not use it, but unmake it, cast it into the fire and let it melt away to nothing. Gollum could not allow it, would not allow it. Everything else, the betrayal, the hunt, the centuries of obsession, all of it would be meaningless if the precious was destroyed. Better that Sauron reclaim it. Better that the world burn. Better that everything end than that the precious cease to exist. Something in Gollum had broken completely now. Whatever remained of Smeagol had been pushed so far down, so thoroughly silenced, that it might as well not exist anymore. There was only Gollum now, only the obsession, only the desperate, all-consuming need. He followed them up the slopes of Mount Doom, two hobbits exhausted beyond measure, crawling more than walking, every step an agony of will over flesh. And behind them, unseen, Gollum crept, waiting for his moment. His mind had simplified to a single thought, endlessly repeated. The precious, must save the precious, must take it, must keep it, must not let them destroy it. Everything he had ever been was gone now. Every memory, every relationship, every moment of his life that wasn't about the ring had been burned away by 5 centuries of obsession. Sméagol was dead, or so thoroughly buried that he might as well be. The grandmother who had loved him was forgotten. Sméagol was a ghost, barely remembered. The river, the sun, the simple joys of his youth, all of it erased, replaced by nothing but need. This was what the ring did. This was its final victory over those who possessed it too long. Not to kill them, but to hollow them out, to remove everything that made them who they were and replace it with a single maddening desire for the thing that was destroying them. Gollum was no longer a person. He was a function, a hunger-given form, a want that walked and schemed and stalked, but had no other purpose, no other meaning, no other existence. Frodo had begun to change too. The ring's weight was crushing him, its corruption seeping into his mind. Even Sam could see it, could see his master struggling, could see the terrible pull that the ring exerted. In another few months, another few years, Frodo might have become another Gollum, another creature consumed entirely by obsession. But they didn't have months or years. They had only the time it took to climb a mountain, to reach the cracks of doom, to stand before the fire. And Gollum crept behind them, unnoticed in their exhaustion, biding his time, waiting for the moment when he could strike, when he could reclaim What was his when he could save the precious from destruction? There was no turning back now, no possibility of redemption, no chance for Sméagol to re-emerge and make a different choice. That path had been closed, perhaps when Sam interrupted that moment of tenderness, perhaps when Gollum had led them to Shelob, perhaps centuries ago when he had strangled Sméagol for a golden ring. The exact moment didn't matter. What mattered was that it was too late now. The choices had been made, the path set, the fate sealed. Gollum would try to take the ring. He would do anything, sacrifice anything, become anything necessary to possess it one more time. And whatever happened after that, whether he succeeded or failed, whether he lived or died, was irrelevant compared to the need to have it, to hold it, to make it his again. The obsession was complete, the transformation total. The creature that had once been Smeagol was gone, replaced entirely by Gollum, by the desperate hunger, by the madness that the ring created in those who loved it too much and too long. Fate was closing in, on Gollum, on Frodo, on the ring itself. Everything was converging toward a single point, a single moment at the edge of the fire, where decisions made centuries ago would finally reach their conclusion. And Gollum crept forward through the ash and darkness, following the hobbits up the mountain, driven by need, by obsession, by the terrible certainty that the precious must be saved, must be claimed, must be his, whatever the cost, whatever it took, whatever he had to become. The precious was all that mattered, had always been all that mattered, would always be all that mattered. And ahead, in the heart of the mountain, the fire waited. The fire that had made the ring, that could unmake it. That would be the stage for the final act of a tragedy that had begun on a riverbank centuries ago, when a young hobbit-like creature had found something precious and had let it destroy everything he was. There was no turning back. There was only forward, toward the fire, toward the end, toward whatever fate awaited in the depths of Mount Doom. Act X. Fire and release. The end of Gollum. At the cracks of doom, at the very edge of the fire where the ring had been forged, everything came together. All the threads of fate, all the choices made across centuries, all the mercy shown and mercy withheld, everything converged in a single moment. Frodo stood at the precipice, the ring in his hand, ready to cast it into the flames. But he couldn't do it. The corruption was complete, the obsession overwhelming. After carrying the ring so far, suffering so much, enduring the weight and the pull and the terrible desire, he could not let it go. "The ring is mine," Frodo said, his voice strange and distant, and he put it on his finger. And Gollum, who had been creeping behind them, saw his chance, saw Frodo disappear as the ring made him invisible, but knew exactly where he was, could sense the precious as clearly as if it blazed with light. He leaped. They struggled there on the edge of the abyss, two creatures consumed by the same obsession, fighting over the same golden circle that had destroyed them both. Invisible Frodo and visible Gollum, grappling, tearing at each other with desperate strength. And Gollum's teeth found flesh, found Frodo's hand, the hand wearing the ring, and bit down with all the strength of his twisted jaw, with all the hunger of 5 centuries of need. Frodo screamed. The finger came away, severed by Gollum's teeth, the ring still on it. Gollum stood there, triumphant, holding the finger, looking at the ring he had reclaimed at last. After all these years, all this suffering, all this hunting and loss and corruption, he had it again, his precious, his own, returned to him at last. For one moment, one single perfect moment, Gollum knew joy, pure, complete, uncomplicated joy. The ring was his again. He could feel its weight, could see its golden perfection, could know the certainty of possession that was the only happiness he remembered. Precious, 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 he cried out, his voice rising in triumph and ecstasy. We has it at last, my precious. He held it up, the ring and the finger it was still attached to, dancing at the edge of the precipice in his moment of victory. All the pain, all the loss, all the centuries of darkness, they were worth it now. He had his precious back. Nothing else mattered. And in his joy, in his triumph, in his obsessive focus on the ring and nothing else, Gollum lost his balance. He teetered on the edge. His feet scrambled for purchase on the crumbling stone. His eyes, fixed on the ring, didn't see the danger until it was too late. He fell down into the fire, into the molten heart of Mount Doom, still clutching the ring, still crying out in joy, even as the flames rose to meet him. For just an instant, he might have known what was happening, might have felt the heat, the terror, the understanding that he was falling to his death. But if he did, it was overwhelmed by something greater, the knowledge that he died possessing what he loved most, that his last moment was one of triumph, not loss, that he had the precious in the end. The fire consumed him, consumed Gollum and the ring both, melting them together, ending them both in the same instant. The creature who had been Sméagol once, who had become Gollum through centuries of corruption, who had existed only for the ring and nothing else. He died as he had lived, in obsession, in possession, in the terrible joy of having what had destroyed him. And with his death, with the ring's destruction, everything changed. The power that Sauron had poured into that golden circle, the will that had dominated and corrupted and enslaved, it was unmade. The Dark Tower fell. The armies of Mordor broke and fled. The shadow that had lain over Middle-earth lifted like morning fog before the sun. The ring was destroyed. And evil, at least this evil, this particular manifestation of domination and corruption, was undone. And it had been undone by obsession, by a creature so consumed by need that he would follow the ring anywhere, do anything, sacrifice everything, just to possess it one more time. Gollum's corruption, his inability to let the ring go, his desperate final grab at what he loved most. This is what saved the world. Not heroism exactly, not virtue, but the working out of a long pattern, a thread that had been woven through centuries, that had started when Bilbo showed pity to a wretched creature in the dark and spared his life. That pity had shaped everything that followed. If Bilbo had killed Gollum in that moment under the mountains, Gollum would never have been there at Mount Doom, would never have bitten off Frodo's finger when Frodo himself couldn't let the ring go, would never have fallen into the fire, destroying the ring by accident when all intention had failed. Gandalf had said it long ago. Pity. It was pity that stayed Bilbo's hand. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? Then do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment, for even the very wise cannot see all ends. Bilbo's pity, Frodo's pity. Even in the end, even after Gollum's betrayal at Shelob's lair, Frodo had shown mercy, had let Gollum live when Sam would have killed him. And that mercy, that refusal to deal out death even when it seemed deserved, had saved everything. But Sméagol himself was not saved. That was the tragedy at the heart of this tale. There had been moments when redemption seemed possible, when the corruption might have been arrested or even reversed, when Frodo showed kindness, when that tiny spark of Sméagol had responded with genuine care, with the desire to be good again. But those moments had passed, the choices had been made, and in the end, Sméagol was lost, consumed entirely by what he had become, dying as Gollum rather than being reborn as the person he had been. He was not saved in life. Only in death did he serve good, and even then by accident, through obsession rather than virtue. He fell into the fire clutching what he loved, never knowing that in his death he had saved the world he had long ago stopped caring about. It was a mercy, perhaps, that he died in that moment of joy rather than in despair, that his last emotion was triumph rather than loss, that he had the precious, if only for an instant, before the fire took them both. But it was a bitter mercy, a tragedy wrapped in victory, a warning about what obsession could do, what the love of power and possession could reduce a person to, what price was paid for holding too tightly to what should have been let go. Gollum was not a villain, not really. He was a victim who became victimizer, who became victim again. He was someone who made a terrible choice and then was trapped by it, unable to escape, unable to let go, unable to be anything except what the ring had made him. He was a warning, a cautionary tale, a mirror held up to show what any of them, Frodo, Bilbo, even Gandalf or Aragorn, could have become if they had possessed the ring too long, loved it too much, let it define them completely. And he was pitiable. Despite everything he did, despite the murder and betrayal and corruption, he remained something to be pitied rather than hated, because beneath the monster was someone who had been a person once, who had loved his grandmother and fished in the river and had a future ahead of him before the ring destroyed it. In the end, Gollum died as he had lived for 5 centuries, alone, obsessed, clutching his precious, the ring's final victim and its ultimate destroyer, the creature whose corruption saved the world, whose obsession undid the evil that had corrupted him. The fire burned, the mountain shook, and Gollum was gone, dissolved into ash and memory, leaving behind only the lessons of his terrible journey from Smeagol to Gollum, from person to creature, from innocent to corrupted to unknowing savior. Rest, if it came to him at all, came only in death. Freedom from the obsession that had defined every moment of his existence for half a millennium. Release from the need that had hollowed him out and left nothing behind but hunger. The ring was destroyed. Gollum was dead. And Middle-earth was saved by the pity shown to one who seemed least to deserve it. by the mercy given to one who seemed most likely to betray it. Pity and mercy, kindness and compassion. These had shaped the fate of the world more than any sword or spell or show of power. And Gollum, who had known so little of these things in life, had been their instrument in death, had served them unknowingly, had saved everything by being exactly what he was, broken, obsessed, unable to let go. A tragedy, a warning, a strange, twisted mercy at the heart of darkness. This was the end of Gollum, the creature the ring consumed, the person who had been Sméagol, who became something else, who died in fire still reaching for what had destroyed him. May we learn from his story. May we remember that obsession destroys, that mercy matters, that what we love can consume us if we love it more than life, more than others, more than ourselves. May we remember Sméagol, who fished by a river and loved his grandmother and had no idea what was waiting for him in the dark water. And may we remember that even in the darkest corruption, even in the most complete fall, there can be purpose. Not salvation, perhaps, but purpose. Not redemption, but meaning. Gollum fell into the fire, and in falling, saved the world. That is his story, from beginning to end, from innocence to corruption, to accidental heroism. The creature, the ring consumed. The warning Middle-earth would never forget.